J. Sai Deepak. Now, it's not often that a Tamilian lawyer has such a vast cult following in a city like Kolkata. He trained as an engineer, became a lawyer, had his hand in history, and is also somewhat dips his toes occasionally into the political waters of India. A man who has captivated the minds of the young with his intellectual sharpness and sheer lucidity. He is a legend. And I'm not going to waste any more time, so let's just move on straight to Sai for his account.
Namaste. I'm actually at sea. I never imagined that people belonging to this ideological spectrum could draw this kind of a crowd in Kolkata. So thank you for coming in such numbers. It's heartening. I just miss a couple of historians at this point who we had the opportunity to engage with in my previous outing here. Because the conversation was getting way too serious and they managed to make it a bit funny. So, before I proceed any further, I'd like to thank Swapanda for this brilliant organization that he's put together, for the work that he's done, and for heaping undeserved praise and encomia on me. I say this because I have benefited from the positioning of social media significantly because I happen to be a part of this generation. But imagine what his generation and the generation before that would have gone through to represent this ideology. So, if anything, people like me are standing on the shoulders of these giants with respect and humility and gratitude. And I envy the interesting life Sri Sanya leads. And the kind of things and number of things he manages to excel at, it's fantastic. I think we have a polyglot in this generation. He's a role model worthy of emulation for a lot of people of this generation and the next. How many people are from my Biradri, namely the legal fraternity here? A show of hands, please. Thank you. And how many from NUJS? Thank you. Thanks for coming. So, let me explain why I was supposed to deliver a lecture in their college today. Was supposed to, should tell you a lot. So the original session was at 12:30. The group from the institution that put together the invitation, and they'd been coordinating with me for a couple of months now. They'd done everything, but the usual suspects started circulating certain messages on WhatsApp. And then the invitation was put to vote. I received credible information from the organizers that the vote was certainly in my favor, but I said, I'm not going to make it for the simple reason that once an invitation is extended, I don't see the point of putting it to vote. So I respectfully rescinded. But this tells you how much of work is left to be done, that even in law schools, where free speech is supposed to be celebrated and practiced, not just celebrated through lip service, you see how it plays out in action. And then we hold forth and grandstand on soapboxes as conveniently as possible and as often as possible as to how free speech is under attack. So here's what I propose to do. This will be a slightly fishing and roving exercise in terms of dealing with history. I've had the benefit of learning from better informed people, so let me start off with a few disclaimers, which should warm the cockles of the hearts of quite a few people on the other end of the ideological spectrum. I am not a historian by any yardstick, by any stretch of imagination. I am just a keen student of Bharat Mata, that's it. My foray into this subject has been largely because of certain compulsions. Because law never completes the picture, it only tells you a part of the picture. I don't think it's ever possible to understand law as a subject without understanding history, without understanding economics, without understanding culture. And that's precisely why, and this is not an attempt to sell the books, this is precisely why I've tried to approach that subject through multiple prisms to try and see how did this cumulative journey translate to some kind of a policy or a legislative approach or a constitutional fiber or fabric as far as Bharat is concerned. That's the entire agenda behind the books. But the more I read history to understand our constitutional journey, I realize that it's impossible for me to talk about Bharat's constitution without talking about its consciousness. That is according to me, that's where the battle is being fought. Politics at best is a topsoil. I think it's perhaps the uppermost layer, and perhaps, and I say this without any attempt at derision or trying to sound derogatory, it is at best a superficial layer. It doesn't complete the picture. It doesn't tell you the entire thing. So if you have to understand Bharat's history, or even Bengal's history for that matter, I think you will have to split and stratify that journey into at least 4 different layers. The political layer is just one aspect of it. Never conflate the political layer with the social layer, because the social layer is the subterranean, let's say, dhara that constantly flows. The third layer, of course, is the metaphysical layer. You cannot make sense of Bharat's history without understanding its metaphysical journey, its social journey, and its political journey, because every Shivaji has needed a Samarth Ramdas. And every Hakka and Bukka has needed a Vidyaranya. So, the hand of the Rishi holds and leads the hand of the Raja, giving him or her the necessary honor codes within which they are supposed to operate. That's been the history of Bharat. That's been the history of Bharat. I'll just go back to what Sri Sanyal has beautifully educated us with for the last 1 hour, and I think it was illuminating. I specifically put a question to Swapanda asking what are the red lines that I'm not supposed to cross here. He said, you have a carte blanche, go ahead, do what you want. So, with his blessings and with hopefully the encouragement of the audience, I'd like to unpack a few uncomfortable aspects of Bharat's history, use a few terms which we think are outlawed, which I don't think have been outlawed yet, fortunately. And allow me to make you a bit uncomfortable, make you squirm in your seats, and see how much I can push you, because that's my job, agent provocateur. Narayana, Narayana. So, who do you think built these ships in the ancient period? Who would have built it? Who had the knowledge for it? Thank you for using the word, the Shudras. Surely Brahmins didn't build it. You had communities around these trades and these crafts. Could they have built ships without education? Without technical education? Is it possible? Can you be a sthapati from the Vishwakarma community who's sculpting the itihasas and the Puranas on the walls of the temple without understanding our itihasas and Puranas? Surely Vishwakarma community doesn't fall within V1 and V2, going by the current classification. So they had access to this. So what is it about Bharat's history and the nature of Hindu society that we are missing? What is it that we don't understand? I'm a mechanical engineer. Let me try and use a former mechanical engineer at that. 2006 was the last time I touched an engineering book. So let me try and use that fraternity as an example to try and see if I can draw some parallels with how the Hindu system is operated, and then explain and come back to the history of Bengal. I'll tie it all up. Just give me some time to, let's say, build some lead into this. One, mechanical engineers don't build things. We design. We don't put together formulae, we use. So there is someone even above us. And that has to be the Puritan, someone who is into basic research, fundamental research. That guy wouldn't know how to operate the lathe machine. Even engineers, most of us don't know. You might assume that if a vehicle were to break down on the highway, we would know how to operate or repair. Most of us don't. If you ask a mechanical engineer if he knows how to, let's say, build a mold in the foundry, which is what it's called, he learns it from a non-engineer. He doesn't learn it from an engineer. He learns it from a non-engineer. Because the person at the shop floor knows what he does what he knows best. As a mechanical engineer, when you enter the core sector, which is the manufacturing sector, you are expected to go through the boot camp, which is to go to the shop floor, understand how machines actually run and work through people who are actually qualified through what we call the ITI programs. Not IITs, ITIs. And you're expected to engage with them, understand them, acclimatize in that environment, understand what they go through. If you don't earn their respect, you cannot hope to run a factory. If you don't earn the respect of the people at the shop floor, there is no way you can run a factory. My family has produced so many mechanical engineers that it was the default option. So literally it's a family of nuts and bolts. And so many of them have risen through the ranks and they know what it means to earn the respect of people on the shop floor. You may have scintillating degrees to boot from the best of institutions. You may know how to put together an equation. You may talk about the science of it. But you don't know what to do when something breaks down at the shop floor. They know it better. So the Hindu structure, you have to see it as increasing degrees of abstraction. That does not make anyone at any rung or level inferior. Because your abstraction is useless if you don't know or if you don't have someone who knows how to bring it to life. Just give someone a simple piece of metal and ask them, this is the shape that it is supposed to finally come out with. Here's the lathe machine. I'm giving you all the heads you need. I'm giving you all the drill bits you need. I'll give you all the tool bits you need. Let's see if you can do this on your own. The best of engineers will suck at it. They don't know what they're doing at all. Not just in this country, in most countries. Because our job is to design using equations that we have inherited from someone who has done basic research, and then it is farmed out to someone for implementation on the shop floor. Brahmins may have actually put together schools of mathematics, but its implementation on the ground for actual application was done by non-Brahmins. That's how this society has operated. It is a symbiotic structure where no one jati or varna can exist without the help or the support of the other. And the higher the levels of abstraction, both with respect to, let's say, secular knowledge and religious knowledge, the higher is the obligation on you to maintain purity of character and purity of ritual, both. Chitta Shuddhi along with Shuchi go hand in hand. That is the broad framework or the scheme of the metaphysics of the Sanatana society. If you don't understand this innate impulse which informs our societal structure and organization, it is very easy to play mischief by pitting one against the other. It's as good as pitting the head against the hand, as if the head can do without the hand, and the hand can guide itself without the head. This needs to be understood because, as I understand, the way winds are currently blowing in whichever quarter, this is going to be the subject of discussion with several forces within and without trying to poison this crucible and this cauldron. And this needs to go out in as many languages as possible, at every level as possible, so that we protect and preserve ourselves from implosion and explosion. Will come a change in wedding rituals and everything and all the sanskaras that you follow. So what does this tell you? After a point, that identity is a function of your domiciliary status. Wherever you stay for domiciliary status, wherever you stay for generations. Why do you have Guptos and all that? I just wanted to tell you that my family is the one that helped Shivaji Maharaj escape from Agra to the Sahyadris. And we were originally from Agra. We are otherwise people from the north. He realized that our entire family would be persecuted for enabling this escape. And therefore he said, you run away with us. And once we reached the Sahyadris, we were given two options. Here is this fort called Salher. Here is the fort called Mulher. Choose one of these two. They chose Mulher and their surnames have become Mulherkar. And what is the language that their extended family speaks? Marathi. 400 years ago or 300 years ago, they wouldn't have spoken Marathi. Take the example of Sri Krishna Deva Raya. Tamilians can celebrate him, Kannadigas can celebrate him, Telugus can celebrate him, and aficionados of Sanskrit can also celebrate him. From Amukta Malyada to every book that he has written, a lot of people actually claim for themselves that he is their icon. I suspect, and I'm sorry to say this, that this regional chauvinism is significantly a contribution of colonization, coupled with the enforcement of that colonial move through the state reorganization on a linguistic basis in 1956. If that had not happened, I don't know if we would be addressing Shivaji Maharaj's empire as a Marathi empire. We'd have called it a Hindu empire. There is a decent chance that we wouldn't be fighting for icons and imputing regional labels to them, but for the colonial experience. Not but for the Islamic invasions, but for the colonial experience, which means prior to that and until that point, you hadn't lost your sense of who you were, and you had not decided to divide yourselves on linguistic lines or regional lines. Sri Tyagaraja comes from Tiruvayar in Tamil Nadu. All his songs are, at least most of them, his kritis are composed in Telugu. He comes from the Kaveri belt. He comes from what we call the Bhagavatar lineage. But today, Carnatic music is associated the most with which state? Where is the music festival every year during winter season? It's in Tamil Nadu. It's not in Karnataka. It's not in Andhra, or even divided Andhra Pradesh, which you know as Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. The world over, people come from all parts of the world only to attend to this music festival in Tamil Nadu, including contingents of Japanese. Some of the photographers who have actually come, I recently shared a video of a Japanese gentleman who knows the ragas by now, who speaks Tamil by now, whose only job during this festival is to come to Tamil Nadu to be a photographer for each of these kacheris or these concerts or performances. What I'm perhaps trying to tell you is, my message of decolonization has been misunderstood, distorted, sometimes either unintentionally or with motivation. But the point is not to push xenophobia, but the point is to unplug ourselves from the matrix that we have injected ourselves into. Once upon a time, out of sheer compulsion, and now out of choice. To try and say that, I don't think there is something called as Bengali history. I'm sorry to say this. I think there is a history of Hindus in Bengal. That's how I see it. And I don't say this for brownie points before this audience. In the 400 and odd lectures that I've delivered since September 2016, which started at the Press Club of India, I don't think I've ever made a regional statement ever. And that is because I have lived across different parts of Bharat. You can do a fact check on this. You will not be able to prove me wrong on this. I rarely get my facts wrong. At the age of 16, I'm out of Hyderabad. Sorry, Urf, Bhagyanagar. The next 4 years are spent in the heartland of Dravidianism, Coimbatore, doing engineering from 2002 to 2006. 11th of July 2009, I set foot in Indraprastha. I have spent close to a decade there, 16, 17 years in Delhi, which I think is named after Maharaja Dilu. I am fairly comfortable with Hindustani, which is a Mishrit Bhasha. I'm fairly okay with Klisht Hindi. I understand a smattering of Malayalam. I can understand the swear words of your mother tongue. I understand the Telangana dialect of Telugu. I understand the Andhra dialect of Telugu. I can identify various dialects of Tamil. So for all practical purposes, I have no regional identity in my head. What others may impute is a different issue. I'm certainly proud of my roots and my origins. Don't get me wrong. क्योंकि जो अपने घर का नहीं हो सकता है, वो समाज का क्या होगा? So ये global citizen nonsense मुझे तो बख्श दो भाई, मुझसे वो होता नहीं है. I don't believe in that. वो बाद में होगा. तुम पहले यहाँ से शुरू करो. See, global citizen is the same as that fad which says, I am spiritual but not religious. दोनों एक ही लेवल के superficial nonsense है मेरे हिसाब से. Therefore, you should tolerate my Hindi as well. So the point I'm trying to make is, we have enough issues to deal with already. After millennia of struggle, going through rapacious genocides, where we have been pushed to the verge of extinction multiple times, we have come back. We finally have a demographic dividend with exposure to technology, alternate media which is capable of pushing our points of view, and I use them in plural with responsibility. This is not the time for the Hindu society to be bogged down by fratricide, because that would pave the way for genocide. One of the reasons that I started off by discussing the history of Hindutva in Bharat, in Bengal, in the 19th century, is not because something is approaching, because I'm unconcerned with it. Because I care only for Hindu survival. That is my bottom line at all points of time. I have no interest in overtly or subliminally dictating your electoral choices at the hustings. That is your prerogative, that's your constitutional right, and you don't need to disclose this to anybody else. The attempt here is to convey to the rest of the world, especially those who write off two categories of Hindus, Bengali Hindus and Kerala Hindus, don't make that mistake. Please don't do that. That is wrong. Hinduism, Sanatana Dharma, has still survived in Bengal because of its own native impulse to be Hindu, to remain Hindu, despite overwhelming odds. If anything, this society has managed to keep Jati identity alive without letting Jati dictate everything to a significant extent. It's not as if you don't have the Roys and the Shingharoys and the Ghoshas and whatnot. You have everything under the sun. But it hasn't resulted in the kind of Jativad that you see in other parts of Bharat. There may be certain reasons for it. Maybe someday I'll understand it better. I'm not going to hold forth as if I'm an expert on your internal history at this point. Sorry, your history at this point from a non-Bengali perspective. And the reason why I say that is, there is something that you have done. I don't wish to give communism the benefit for it. I don't think it is the product of communism. Nor do I think it is the product of certain social movements, starting with the Brahmo movement as well. I don't think that's the case. There is a decent chance that you represent the fundamental state of a Hindu society as it is meant to be understood if it were not to be influenced by the colonizer's influence. I think that is who you are. And perhaps that's who all of us have been, until we decided to bring in atrocity literature, which has no basis whatsoever, to paint 2,000 years of history, 5,000 years of history. Where is the basis? What is the evidence? Because the big picture that's emanating from that entire scene that meets the eye is that you have a bunch of super elites where the rich and the powerful congregate. They choose to deprive you of your fundamental cultural and religious moorings, make you dependent on them, which is corporations and politics. And this comes from a hardcore non-communist. I don't have a problem with wealth creation. Please don't get me wrong. And ultimately, that society where every individual has been atomized to the core is left with no survival mechanisms or devices to protect his mind space. And that mind space has become the battleground for all and sundry. From pharmaceutical corporations to social media organizations to politicians, to the extent you don't know what is fact and what is fiction anymore. And a society which has gained material prosperity is hurtling down the path of dystopia. Because artha, kama is done, but what is not there is dharma and moksha. Those guardrails are completely absent. So it's easy picking for anyone who knows how to control the minds. And that's what the Western society has become. As a Hindu, as a practicing Sanatani, I don't suffer even a scintilla of schadenfreude, which is I don't take vicarious pleasure in somebody else's suffering. I don't. Whoever it may be. I'm just saying that the trial and error process of the West is complete and you can see what the end result looks like while you're still growing. That picture is not unique to this side of the Atlantic. Europe is no better. I think in 21 or 22, in one of my conversations with this good friend, Arihant Pavaria, as part of his podcast, Vad, I specifically said that the one part of Europe which will be relatively untouched by this deluge of materialism would be the eastern part, would be the Polands of the world, the Russias of the world, basically because for good or bad, the Orthodox Church is still alive. And therefore, it sets a benchmark for human behavior and says, thus far and no further. Have some red lines, some bright lines that you will not cross, either in individual life or politics or social life. If there is no Lakshman Rekha whatsoever, then where does this go? It's a free-for-all, a laissez-faire approach to values, so to speak, and then this is the end goal. everything goes is the name of progressivism. I'm sorry, I don't subscribe to that nonsense, because it basically operates without a sense of responsibility, with no conscience, and is certainly incompatible with Sanatana Dharma, because we believe in karma. Every action has to have some consequence, good or bad. So, I am not here to tell you stop using technology. I have never made any of those Luddite suggestions ever. I'm only saying your interest in Bharat's culture should not be limited to its political history, because the ripple effect is into society and then consciousness, metaphysics. A society which has been completely denuded of its faith in spirituality now is looking for someone to show up on the horizon, to show them the way. Every YouTube video of Trump in the comments is praising Putin. That tells you that notwithstanding the psyops that they may have resorted to, the propaganda that they may have resorted to, people are able to see through the BS and they realize, okay, there is something wrong with our society. There is something fundamentally wrong with us, and we have not been able to hit reset because all the tools and mechanisms which can hit reset have been taken over, or they've been completely denuded of any kind of social say. My look at Bharat's history, or any part of it, or any region or cross-section of it, is not meant to be an archival study. I'm just saying, so recently I've been described as someone who's constantly going around with the hammer of decolonization looking for a nail. Which is to say that you're only presenting the problem statement, but where is the solution? I'm saying some of the solutions which lie in the past are not palatable to you. And those solutions which you can even perhaps adapt, morph, apply to your current circumstances, there is a mental barrier in the audience. Therefore, I need to unplug the audience from the matrix that it has been pushed into before it can start seeing the value of those solutions. Decolonization is not an academic exercise whatsoever. If you hate that word, junk it, trash it, I don't care. But surely you must be in a position to acknowledge the impact of colonization in your lives. Whatever is it that you can do to remove its impact or its effect, the negative effects at the very least, feel free to call it whatever you wish to, but at least apply the substance even if you junk the word. I'll narrate a few instances from my own life, not because it is of any particular value, but how is it that I myself have been pushed deeper and deeper into this journey. There's a decent chance that I'm regurgitating a few things that I've said elsewhere, but the good part of being a lawyer is that I know how to present old wine in new bottle, so suffer it. So after the Sabarimala experience, I had a couple of people coming and telling me, Sir, abhi you will be exposed to all sorts of energies because you have touched a particularly sensitive and serious subject. मुझे लगता है आपको साधना शुरू करनी चाहिए. I said, यार मेरे schedule में कैसे होगा? It's already a nishachar. It's the life of an asura brahmana. कहाँ से मैं करूँगा ये सब? And given my energy and aggression, मैं एक जगह पे बैठ नहीं सकता. ये साधना किस नाम की चीज़ है? ये कौन सी लड़की है? I don't know. So with time, I realized, and there was a phase, I think between 2018 and 2021, 22, when I was pulled into these lecture circuits despite my practice commitments. And after a point, I unplugged out of it only to ask myself, what is this leading to? What is the impact? What is the actual value add to anyone? The good part is, I was able to share my own journey and my learnings with the people who bothered to listen. And in the process, I realized that topics which were hitherto untouchable, pun unintended, and issues which couldn't have been broached, I'm able to finally talk about it. Because the one word that has completely been pixelated out of social conversations and public conversations is consciousness. Because one of the things that we don't understand about secularism is that we always see it only from a political lens. Secularism means the state will maintain a distance from one particular religion, or it'll have a hands-off approach to certain religious institutions. But the one thing that it does is that any discussion about metaphysics in public discourse is to be treated as an ornamental discourse which is compartmentalized. It has no relationship with politics. It has no relationship with social discourse whatsoever. That is the impact of secularism. It tells you, sorry, spirituality is different and Rozmarra ki jo zindagi hai, wo alag hai. These two cannot collide. They don't need to collide. They exist in, let's say, watertight compartments, in silos and walled gardens. That's effectively what we've understood. My realization is, in my view, and I'm not putting forth a conspiracy theory, I think more and more the files are released, this much has become clear. It has been a conscious attempt to empty our heads of these important layers, these filters. It has been a designed approach, a targeted approach to remove those filters from our heads. And the mind is a vessel which can never remain empty. So it boils down to one simple question. Do you wish to fill it with gold, or do you want garbage to rush in? That's the only question that you have to ask. Now that gold has been emptied out from your head in the name of Jati, Manuvadi, Brahmanvadi, this and that, it is now open to all sorts of, let's say, nefarious influences. Therefore, your state is an important example in that poor context. So allow me to say this with some degree of responsibility. The social movements and the religious movements, or the reform movements of the 19th century, had two impacts. First, it told you ritual was not necessary, plus it was bad, and ritual is equal to superstition. That was the first wave which changed Bengali Hindu consciousness. The second wave said, anyone who holds the power over ritual, or who teaches you ritual, is wielding a tool of social oppression and exploitation. Therefore, those who could actually give you some kind of guidance were removed from the equation altogether because they had been villainized, as opposed to being celebrated, valorized, encouraged, whichever way you see it. And I'm not referring to one particular varna or jati. I'm just talking of those people who were in a position to offer cultural, spiritual, and thought leadership to Hindus. Then the third wave said, we are in this daridra condition because of our polytheism and because of our diversity. Therefore, let us now prove the worth of the religion of our ancestors on the anvils of the colonizers' religion. Therefore, let us also show we are also no different from monotheistic faiths. And then started an attempt to recraft Sanatana Dharma on monotheistic lines. A polytheistic tradition is then force-fit into a monotheistic tradition without realizing we follow both monotheism in consciousness and polytheism in expression. That is what we do. Ultimately, it may be Brahman, and then you have Devatas. So that layer effectively decides that, you know what, how do I make monotheism into Hindu thought? Wherein you're looking for villains in all priestly positions. I'm sure everybody suffers, and there is a reason for it. Because the more you read literature, you realize that the Church of Brahmo Samaj actively sent out missionaries across the country, including to the south. They went to Punjab, they went to Maharashtra, they went to Tamil Nadu, all parts of Bharat. At one point, this movement was leading the intellectual discourse not just in this part of Bharat, but the rest of Bharat. Fortunately, the leading lights of this movement realized that there are some serious issues with the foundational assumptions of Brahmoism. Taker in a good way, in my humble view, was Sri Rabindranath Tagore. And the conviction to take on the empire at its peak. And the conviction to take on the empire at its peak, intellectually and militarily. In my view, a Bose would not have been made possible without Sri Aurobindo. They may not be Samkaleen, they may have spoken, they may not have spoken, but the ambience and the atmospherics that was created or were created made it possible for someone else to take the torch from there on, take the baton from there on, and move forward. The more you read, you'll also realize that there is a serious umbilical cord that connects the Brahmo Samaj and the founder of Arya Samaj. They met, they were talking, and then you'll ask yourself, okay, is there a common pattern of thought that is going through this entire dhara across the country? Which is why I don't think we should read the history of Bengal in silos with a tunnel vision. They were interacting even in those days when there was no social media. They were actively talking to each other. They were cross-pollinating. All of this was happening. The one question, the most uncomfortable question that I wish to leave the audience with, and please do take it back, do your own research. You can junk and trash everything that I've said, but just take this as a homework question and find out the answer on your own, which is, did we have this kind of antagonistic jati consciousness prior to the colonizer setting foot here? That's the only question that I wish to ask. That's the one question that I think is important, because while there is a raging debate with respect to the outsider, there is also a raging internal debate. The question is, I'm so grateful, thank you, he has a pen and a paper. Before the colonizer put his roots in Bharat, that is post 1757, did we have jati wars where one jati hates the other, and did it apply the oppressor-oppressed framework prior to that? If anything, literature says that this entire framework was prepared in the laboratory of the 1970s, thanks to your own intellectuals. You have given the problem. I'm happy to submit that you have the antidote as well to that problem. There is a wonderful book written on the history of Brahmo Samaj by this gentleman called David Kopf, K-O-P-F. That book is a wonderful resource to understand the psychology and the backgrounds of the leaders of Brahmo Samaj. So, some of the leading works on the Brahmo Samaj, according to me, Sophia Dobson Collett, among the earliest biographers of Brahmo Samaj, who had seen Raja Ram Mohan Roy in action at a church, I think at a Unitarian church in England, as a young girl. Her work she hands over to Shivanath Shastri, who subsequently becomes one of the leaders of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, along with, I think, Devendranath Tagore, or maybe Keshav Chandra Sen, I don't know, one of these two. His work is the next book that you have to read. But all of them were writing as insiders to the movement, as people with a skin in the game, as stakeholders to that entire worldview. David Kopf writes this book in the 80s, 1980s. And he says, and the best part is he reads translations from Bengali libraries. He pulls out material that was not previously available. He pulls it all out and he says, my sense is this was a confused lot, which was suffering from, in his own words, a psychological problem of identity confusion, because they had one foot outside and one foot inside. So his entire question was, how do I make sense of these people who were coming from the Kulin Brahmin families, who were coming from hardcore Vaishnavite families, and how do I make sense of their love for Unitarian Christianity? What explains this? And why would they want to recraft and remold their own faith in the mold of the other, especially in the mold of the religion of the colonizer? Why would they do this? You can read the book, but in my view, the introduction of the preface to the book contains about 3 or 4 scintillating, incisive and educative paragraphs where he does a brilliant analysis of what he thought was driving them. Read that. Please do read that. And this book is commonly available on most pirated websites. So you should be able to read it. Comes from an IP lawyer, I understand, but whatever works. But please do read it. Now what is happening and why I think this audience has been made possible, apart from the brilliant efforts of stalwarts like Sri Swapandas Gupta, is that काल चक्र फिर से घूम चुका है. Bengal, as much as the rest of Bharat, is ready for ancient wisdom and its contemporary relevance. I am not someone who suffers from pre-industrial nostalgia. It's like, oh, good old days, let's go back to go charate hain, ye karte hain, wo karte hain. I myself, if I'm pushed to the wall, how much of the Nitya Karma responsibilities and obligations will I be able to discharge as prescribed by the Shastras? I don't know. But it's one thing to realize that I may be a personal failure in that regard, but another thing to realize the value of it. I am no exemplar of how that is to be led, but I would weep moreover the loss of the mind that could think of the Shastra behind the consecration of the temple. Because that is knowledge. You can recreate a physical structure, but putting together and reconstructing that knowledge system is very, very difficult. How many shakhas of Vedas have been lost? We don't know. How many yajnas have been lost? We don't know. How many existing practitioners of Somayagam still exist? We don't know. Someday we'll realize that some German or some Russian is actually practicing this in some other part of the world. And not here. Because they have understood the value and they're taking it up. You can perhaps get sucked into the most, it's an adult audience, the most glamorous, sexy battle of all, which is politics. Or you can use it to a limited extent and pay attention to the dhara underneath and below. Politics is important. Of course it's important. Otherwise, the route from airport to Taj Bengal is full of blue and white. And it's not the missionaries of charity. So, it's unfortunate that some colors have become representative of certain minds. I can't help it. But I am trying to say that why is Rajadharma important? Why is the position of the Kshatriya so important, as Sri Aurobindo called it? He called the Kshatriyas to take their positions back. And he said, please step onto the stage. Because you have inherited generations of ruling and governance. And you're the only one who has the ability to wield the sword which makes the practice of dharma possible. Because without the Kshatriya standing at the door with the sword unsheathed, it's not possible for you to follow your dharma. So Kshatriya dharma is important because without that umbrella, without that Kshatriya chaya, you cannot survive. So I am not for a moment rubbishing the importance of Kshatriya dharma or politics. But politics and Kshatriya dharma is a means to an end. The end is practice of dharma. Never forget that. So politics for its own sake practiced by anyone is unacceptable, should be unacceptable regardless of who does it. And therefore, I am requesting the minds of Bengal to go back to your own, let's say, role models. I have to say this because otherwise I'm sure some YouTube snippet will cut something out and then all hell will break loose. Not that I care. In 2026, you have the benefit of hindsight of what happened from 1757 to 2026. Uska kuch to vishleshan hoga, kuch to analysis hoga. Some analysis of what happened, what are the lessons, why are we where we are, and what are the reasons for it. Somewhere we'll actually do the Mulyankan, right? So you may not want to pull people down or replace. But there is an alternate strategy that is typically applied in logic, reason, and philosophy, which is you create a priority or a hierarchy, which is the ones who have batted for the civilization and its red lines will always occupy the highest possible position of this idea with me. This is a wonderful scholar. Please follow this person if you can on social media. Pranav Kumar Vasishtha, who's a wonderful student of Nyaya Shastra, who's done extensive analysis of Bharatiya jurisprudence, Hindu jurisprudence, why just call it Bharatiya jurisprudence, and who's applied his mind to constitutional thought, made a suggestion to me. He said, sometimes when you speak, it gives the impression to people that you're trying to pull people down. Maybe you're trying to break certain icons. Why don't you try something else? I said, okay, tell me, what is it that you think I should do? He said, why don't you create a hierarchy of icons? To say, इनके भी contribution को आप recognize कीजिए, लेकिन इनसे ऊपर भी कुछ लोग थे. That way you're not disrespecting someone, because after all that someone is responding to their circumstances at that point. But if you have people who were there samkaleen or who lived immediately thereafter, who despite those circumstances offered a better response to the defensive tradition, then respect that person even more. So I hope that someday we can actually have that so-called conversation. Coming back to Bengal, it is in your hands to decide whether you want this to become a Bangladesh or not. Already Dhakeshwari's land is being encroached for residential buildings. Chandranath Mandir sees regular encroachment. The surrounding green is engulfing some kind of green. I'll just leave it at that. At some stage, all this philosophical farrago has to have a practical consequence, and that is, in the interest of Dharma, protect your turf, protect your territory. Shambho Shankara. So please consider this as a call to 3 different kinds of action. Since you take pride in being Bengalis who pursue the intellectual side, go back to reading your history better. All that history reading is useless if you do not practice Dharma personally. Have some red lines in what you're capable of doing and you're not. 3, Naval, who is the current day philosopher, has said something which I've tried to say in cruder words. An individual can never win over a tribe. Tribalism succeeds at the end of the day. I'm not asking for Jati tribalism. I'm beseeching you for Hindu tribalism. If we don't band together, we will be picked apart one by one. 3, as much as you may want to see yourself as a community of Bhudraloks or whatever that is, you have produced some of the finest Kshatriyas who have given the best of resistances known to world history. Don't forget that. Intellect and martial spirit are not necessarily mutually exclusive. They can go hand in hand, because at the end of the day, as Adi Shankara says, Shastra needs Shastra and Shastra needs Shastra to govern it. In the interest of taking questions from the audience, I will end my pravachan for today. Jai Shri Ram, Vande Mataram, Jai Ma.
Okay. Someone asked me a few months ago, how is it that someone like Sai became a senior advocate before he turned 40? Now I think I know the answer. We've seen a visible both these presentations have been about rediscovery, reassessing, and once again coming to terms with our own inheritance? There are loads of questions which come up from this, and both of them have agreed to take a few questions. So I know time is slightly rationed, but we'd love to have a few questions. Vishwajit, if you could. Are there questions? Okay, since the first row was jumped at the opportunity, may I ask Tathagata Roy, former governor of Tripura and somewhere else. Meghalaya, sorry. Bring the mics. And Vishwajit,
my question is to J. Sai Deepak for an extremely illuminating speech, and it has touched so many angles that I don't know which one to touch, but I'll just zero in on one thing. You know, I wasn't aware that you were originally, you had trained as an engineer and eventually became a lawyer. As a matter of fact, that had happened to me also. I also got into politics, began as an engineer, got into politics, and the rest is not much to talk about. Now, I have one question about this duality, that it is said that engineers tend to think in binary terms. And I don't know with what justification. And it is also said that people like, for instance, Osama bin Laden or Sukarno or few others here and there, they began life as an engineer. In fact, Hitler began life as an architect or a painter, which is not quite the same as an engineer. But my question to you, I can't put it as succinctly as you would have done, but my question is, to what extent has your training as an engineer colored your trend of thinking, extremely deep thinking, and brought you to this intellectual level? Thank you.
Okay, we'll club a few questions together. There's a gentleman there. I don't know, I can't really see upstairs, so maybe you'll forgive me if I... Okay.
Thank you so much. Should I go ahead?
Korbo. Mike.
Mike is here with me. Am I audible?
Okay,
Sir,
where
am I
are you?
audible on stage?
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Deepak Sai, for a very inspiring speech. One of my suggestions is to improve the various languages. Why we are not going for a script portability? Script portability. Just like we are, suppose you are a Tamilian, but staying in Hyderabad, you are more conversant with Telugu and the Telugu script. So why you will not read Telugu literature or Tamil literature and writings in Telugu scripts? Because in India, in all the languages, right from Bengali or Telugu or Marathi, they are practically one script.
I think you've made your point. One nation, one script. That's basically.
One nation, one script? No. All nations, one script. All languages, all script. All language. And this was done by Subhash Chandra Bose. This was done by Subhash Chandra Bose in INA in 1942.
I think you made your point. We must take a few. Excuse me, sir.
Namaste, sir. Jai Shri Ram. I'm here. Sir, this is Devarsha, a clerk from Indian Army, Goa. I have a question, sir, for both of you. Sir, the result of Epstein files is devastating. It shows that every top organizations in America and entire Europe are infiltrated with those satanic ideological people. But my point is, Bharat is the only country at that time which is churning amounts and amounts of money for the function of the society and the world. That can be seen or observed in the number of soldiers used and killed from our Bharat during the world wars, and that is why even the colonizers arrived our Bharat.
One request.
So my
In the
question is,
interest of the audience,
doesn't our
keep the
Bharat
question short.
organizations have people from that society and satanic ideology who are actually operating with all these divide and rule concepts of Jati and Varna and whatever we see in this present society?
Okay, thank you, sir.
Right.
Next one.
My question will be directed to Jai Sai, sir. Let me remind to this house, when the chants of Jai Shri Ram was made in the house, it saw an emulsionating voices were engaged. But the man from the front row, when he said Joy Ma Durga, we saw a noticeable subdue in the resonance. Does this not reflect the gradual distancing of Bengal from its own civilizational and cultural roots? Furthermore, how do you interpret that in contemporary Bengali social art cultural ecosystem, that after the frames ideas of Hindutva, it is something which is seen as external or alienic? What is the ideological currents that have shaped this perception? Why does Bengal appear to be intellectually or politically distinct from the rest of India?
One question. Hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're
So
audible.
the question is to Sanjeev, sir. This is Sonali from this, sir. Sir, as you pitched your idea to Mr. Prime Minister of India, so I was just wondering, there could be citizens and young people who might be thinking a lot of ideas to contribute and may be thinking that if we could get some assistance. Like, is there any way that we can, as normal citizens, also pitch in our ideas to you or any ministry where we can feel heard and seen? Thank you.
Okay, as far as getting your ideas through to the system, well, obviously, the Honorable Prime Minister does like new ideas, and you can send it directly to his office. His email is there. But do be warned that there are literally lakhs of such ideas that are sent up. So the best way to get a chance to get these ideas through are to do two things. First of all, do try to spend some time articulating and thinking through the idea, and if possible, creating some sort of a model or implement it in some way so that that idea has some sort of traction. Way too many ideas are just ideas. I myself get literally every day about 10 emails with some idea about how India should manage its fiscal deficit or the rupee or the banking system and so on. Now, maybe some of them are good ideas, but it's not humanly possible to think through them. But if somebody comes with something where the idea is not only, I don't want a long essay, but has actually tried out that idea somewhere and has demonstrated it, then the likelihood of that idea feeding through, not necessarily directly to the Prime Minister, sometimes that's not possible, but at least to the relevant ministry, and then slowly making its way up is radically higher. So yes, great ideas are good, but even in the case of my ship, I did spend a couple of years thinking the whole thing out. I only gave you a few slides, but I had, by the time I turned up in front of the Honorable Prime Minister, a fully articulated design of what that ship would look like. I hadn't built it, but I knew exactly what I would do if I was allowed to do so and had the resources to do so. So please spend some time, not the first idea that comes to your head. Think through what you have to, take it a few steps such that should senior people in the administration or even in corporate system or whoever find an articulated, well-established, thought-through idea, then, and they want to help you, they find it much, much easier to do so. So that would be the first one. The second one, by the way, on the scripts, by the way, let me say that it is true that all Indian scripts are in some ways interoperable. One way of doing that, by the way, thanks to artificial intelligence, is that these can be made very easily interoperable. In fact, in many, many cases, we will be able to actually do this fairly easily, because even more than reading, sometimes hearing the language is even easier. So we may be moving, thanks to artificial intelligence, some of that may become almost routine within the next 2 to 3 years. That technology already exists. Okay, I'll just finish that. Okay, the voyage of that return voyage is already en way. It's just outside Mumbai right now, and it will formally enter Mumbai on the 2nd of March. After that, we will tow it to Karwar, pull it out of water, and make sure that all the stitching isn't okay. And then all kinds of things like barnacles and all that have grown, so they'll have to be scraped off. But if the ship is in good shape, the idea is to take the ship to the other coast, to Odisha, and try and recreate the Bali Yatra, which is the voyage from Konarak to the island of Bali in Indonesia.
My question is, at this time, when
Please, sir, let's Sai answer the existing questions, and
Okay.
after that we can interview.
okay, I'll wait for that. It's all right.
I'll take your question first.
Okay.
In the sense, the gentleman who asked the question about Hindutva being seen as an external entity and why there is not enough of a resonance to Jaima or Jai Durga. So here's what I wanted to suggest. In fact, I think it's a brilliant question. It's a brilliant question, and I'll tell you why. I don't think any social movement in Bharat will succeed, or even a political movement will succeed, if it does not decentralize in its operation and expression. It needs to be alive to the local impulses. I agree with you fully. I don't disagree whatsoever. At the same time, I don't see Jai Shri Ram and Jai Ma Durga as being opposed to each other. I hope that's not the suggestion, right? If I ask for national appropriation of so-called local icons, surely we can't be appropriating or imputing a local identity to Sri Ram. That can't work, right? Second, the Hindutva movement certainly has its slogans and origins. And therefore, let's think of it as something that has an immediate memory recall. Regardless of whichever part of Bharat I've been to, whether it's Assam or any other part of the country, whenever someone who bats for this idea or for this emotion gets on the stage, the first call that I've always heard is Jai Shri Ram. Whether it's Tamil Nadu, Assam, or any other place. That doesn't mean that we are trying to create a hierarchy in terms of either deities or slogans, okay? But I agree, acknowledge, and completely accept the sentiment behind your question, the rationale behind your question, that if Hindutva has to have greater purchase in different parts, especially those parts where it is not traditionally associated with, then it needs to reach out to those communities in a language that they understand. I'm with you on that completely. I have no disagreement whatsoever. I hope that answers your question. Keep it short. Yes.
If I'm audible, sir?
Yes, you are.
I believe I'm not trying to create a parallel between Jai
I
Shri
get
Ram
that.
and
I get that.
Understand it, sir, that Akal Bodhan was a gift of Prabhu Shri Ram given Adi Shankaracharya clubbed
Correct.
it together. But what I'm trying to establish is that when you are not regardless of the fact when you're trying to keep the proximity of itself, the two inseparable identities have become methods or commodities utilized by the politicians for their own welfare.
Right, right.
In a lot of regards.
Right.
So I believe when will the impulse hit the local tribe, that is essentially the citizens of Bengal, to commemorate with the historical importance which we had
Right.
once. I believe.
So this is something I've had a larger feedback to offer to the ecosystem in general, that as much as you may want to encourage grassroots movement to people who are actually on the ground, okay? That practice, when not backed by sufficient theoretical grounding and thought invested in terms of the vision that you wish to push, may only take you so far and not beyond. Which is why I believe that the creation of an intellectual ecosystem that is alive to the social milieu of entry points of different areas is a condition precedent before you start the actual work there. I've always believed that. Whenever I've suggested this, some geniuses on Twitter and other places, rather X, have said, ये जाके 10 वोट भी बटोर नहीं सकता है, ये क्या हमें सिखा रहा है? Well, जो वोट नहीं बटोर पा रहे हैं, वही वामपंथी आपके बच्चों को बिगाड़ रहे हैं. जो एक इलेक्शन भी ठीक से जीत नहीं पाते, उन्होंने सारा कल्चरल डिस्कोर्स और पॉलिसी का डिस्कोर्स जो है उसको हाईजैक करके रखा है. अब समझ में आया? और आप उसका जवाब आप ठीक से दे नहीं पा रहे हैं क्योंकि आपने थियोरी के वैल्यू को समझा नहीं. आपको डेटा बन के रहना है, आपको थियोरी नहीं करना है. देन वेस्ट विल क्रिएट द थियोरी, वी विल बी द डेटा फॉर देम, whether it's vaccines or something else. So therefore, I do believe that you need a constant train or pool of people who are invested in intellectual scholarship on this front from a linguistics perspective, from a Jati relations perspective, from an environment perspective, because even Janjatis are being weaponized, right? So all of that will have to be understood. Can you speak of certain dietary restrictions in certain parts of the country? You have to ask these questions. I can't assume that the vegetarianism that informs, let's say, the political discourse of Gujarat is equally valid in Assam. That makes no sense, or even Bengal for that matter, right? So these binaries that others have created will need to be broken. Now let me come to Sri Tathagat Roy's question. The good part is humanities has broken the ego of an engineer. Because I believe that I understand science better after having read law. Because my dialectical impulses and argumentative tendencies have been sharpened after my exposure to law, which makes it possible to understand science without understanding science. I'll explain this. I won't take more than 30 seconds, sir. One of my areas of practice, which earns my bread and butter and keeps my lifestyle the way it is intellectual property. Which means, and since my training is that of an engineer, I believe I'm good at patent litigation. I don't need to be modest about it. Now, the point is, patents would be across subjects. Mechanical engineers run away from computer science at the time of counseling because we are scared of it, because it doesn't, at least mere dimag mein to aata nahi hai. I've had to understand telecommunications. I've had to understand organic chemistry. I've had to understand all sorts of subjects without knowing those subjects only because of my training in law, because law teaches you to build a logical structure. It helps you fundamentally build a logical structure without knowing the intricacies of science. So rule 1, rule 2, rule 3, which argument militates rule 1. You start thinking of it like that. So yes, that's one. Second, the rigid logic or the analytical approach of an engineer needs to meet with the fluidity of humanities for us to be able to enter political discourse, legal discourse, cultural discourse, and constitutional discourse. Otherwise, it's not possible. Because engineers think in silos or in binaries. You're right, largely. Engineers trained by the current system are seen that way. The engineers of yore did not. They were, let's say, they were poets, they were philosophers, they were mathematicians, they were grammarians, they were Sanskritists and whatnot. We have created these kind of people. But when you combine both, in my humble submission, what happens is, you're able to understand the commercial side of things and you're also able to understand the cultural side of things. If I had to recraft my own career, I would have gone slightly different, which is I'd have chosen economics, history, mathematics, logic, and language in my undergrad before jumping into law. That's what I would have done, as opposed to going for engineering. So all the training that I wish I had, I'm trying to gain it in the course of my writing and my engagements with the public. I hope that answers the question. Which other question did we have? Yes, I'm so sorry. There are questions too. Did I miss out on someone?
Gentleman there.
Yes, sir, please. I'll come back to you. The gentleman
Hello.
from the services, I'll come back to you. Yes.
Hello, Mr. Deepak. Thanks for the excellent speech. I have been a fan of yours. Just let me introduce in 10 seconds. I have been in England for 30 years. I was a consultant anesthetist and intensive care specialist.
Okay.
I've been a fan of yours. I have followed innumerable videos.
Great.
My question directly today is related to politics because I came here, I relocated to India to have a nice retired life. And few things here in West Bengal, the turmoil is much more than most of India. I have now been put into politics and a lot of people are looking up to me for guidance. My question to you is, can you guide me what to do with the public and guide them as well? Keeping in context, I am a fan of Swami Vivekananda as well and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. In this lineage, How can I stand up to the influx from the open border on the east? Let me be direct. And the manipulation of the tyrant kind of regime here. How can I act sensibly and help the public to gain the borders secured and a nice, beautiful Bengal as it used to be?
Understood.
Thank you.
Given the sensitivity of the question and not to evade it, I think the discussion will require the applicability of Chatham House rules. So I would suggest that I discuss it in private, not here. I'm not avoiding the question, but some questions are best answered off the stage. So we'll discuss this later. Yeah, fair enough.
The final 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll have to, regrettably. No, I know there are lots of them.
Sir, you'll be accused of ignoring the left.
Okay.
Namaskar, sir. My question is to J. Sai Deepak, sir. Sir, I'm here, sir. On your right. On your right, sir. Namaskar, sir. Jai Shri Ram. My question is regarding preserving and protection of the cultural and spiritual spaces, more precisely our homelands, which we are losing right now, concerning the demographic change which Bengal is witnessing right now. My only question, sir, is all the intellectual thing which we have taken today, unfortunately, it will surrender before a plate of biryani offered from Haji Ali at a street shop. So my only question is, how do we stop that surrender of the bigger picture to the smaller one?
No.
No, that's the question that sir was also putting in.
Yeah. There's someone from the balcony who's been...
I have just 2 seconds question. Just the question is that regarding the judiciary, because both of you are, one is into policy and one is into Supreme Court. So regarding judiciary, we feel that the judiciary is creating trouble in developing our countries by delaying many judgments and things. So can you please highlight, both of you can please highlight on this topic?
Finally, I want to take one question at least from the balcony. I don't know if there are mics there, but please raise your voice and... Please allow the person up there.
Namaste. Yes, please.
One simple question. So I am proficient in my mother tongue, so question will be me. 2 दिन पहले का इंसिडेंट है. क्लास 8 स्टैंडर्ड में एनसीईआरटी ने इंक्लूड किया एक चैप्टर ऑन जुडिशियल करप्शन. उसको हटा दिया गया. एनसीईआरटी ने अपोलोजाइज कर लिया. स्टिल कंटेम्प्ट नोटिस जा रहा है. इतना ईगो क्यों है सुप्रीम कोर्ट?
Got it.
No, you answer whichever ones you choose. The ones which need the Chatham House rules can await another day.
So, to answer your question, Open Magazine has already put out the tentative title of the 3rd book without my permission. The road from Bharat to India is the title of the book. Okay? And if my memory serves me right, because the number of iterations the title has gone through, it's Colonialities, Cultural Balkanization and Constitutionalism is the subtitle. Okay. 2, the potential color of the book is crimson red. It is. Because it obviously shows the bleeding of the mind and the body both. Okay, so there will be some discussion to that effect. 3, without touching any existing hot potatoes, I just believe that finally the window has opened for certain uncomfortable conversations thanks to the development of January 2026. I'll just leave it at that. Okay? And I think it's important that we use this to generate productive conversations as opposed to antagonistic conversations, and make sure that people who belong to the Dharmic fold and the Hindu fold remain within, and we find conflict resolution mechanisms within the society using the temple as, let's say, an epicenter for justice dispensation from a social justice perspective, without constantly involving the state, because regardless of who holds the reins of power, power has a tendency to politicize, let's say, social grievances, and you can never guarantee कि जो सत्ता आपके हाथ में है किसी और दिन किसके हाथ में जाएगी. So you will have to come out with, let's say, safeguards in that sense, which are societal in nature, so that these conversations remain within the house. That's point number 1. Then I had some other question. I'm so sorry. I had someone else was asking some other question. Judiciary, yes, please. Judiciary, one was NCRT and the other is this. I believe I'm a stakeholder in the system. And as much as I would like to take pot shots at the system the way others may want to, I believe that there are some real issues as well. There were certain notions that I held earlier, and with time I realized that the system is heavily understaffed. Okay? Second, I also believe that judiciary is not a single institution. We as lawyers believe that there are as many Supreme Courts as there are judges in the Supreme Court, because every mind is different. Okay, so it's not as if merely because people come from the same institution, they necessarily share their views on everything. वो होता नहीं है. Okay? 3, just एक counterfactual या hypothetical आप इसको थोड़ा सोच के देख लीजिए. अगर आपकी सरकार सत्ता में नहीं होती केंद्र में और कोई और सरकार होती, would you not want to have access to the judiciary to at least stop a few things which could be detrimental to the country? ये सोच के चलना कि सत्ता हमारे हाथ में हमेशा होगी, therefore institutional independence को प्रोटेक्ट करने की जरूरत नहीं है, या फिर उसके खिलाफ बोलना, मेरे हिसाब से it is penny wise and pound foolish. It's not an individual statement, because it was the judiciary that made several judgments possible prior to 2014, exposing several scams, चाहे वो coal scam हो या कुछ और हो. And हवा का रुख जो था वो बदला उसके बाद. So ये भी एक सत्य है. Sorry? So that's exactly what I'm talking about when you talk of delays. If someday, one of my professors was Professor Nandi, who was from the lower judiciary of Bengal, who taught us CPC, Code of Civil Procedure in law school. I think someday you should actually have conversations with members of the district judiciary and others to exactly understand कि system कैसे काम करता है. Okay? I am not saying that the system needs to be defended on every front, let's say on every parameter, but there are some real problems in the system. I'll give you a simple example and I'll leave it at that. The money that every decent or half-decent lawyer makes, perhaps in the 4th or 5th year of practice, outstrips the money that a judge takes home as salary. What is the incentive of any decent practicing litigator to go on the other side of the bench? And how many children, or rather how many families and parents are asking their children to take up law to become judges in district courts as opposed to becoming successful lawyers? आप ये भी पूछ लीजिए. Because at the end of the day, sometimes what you can shop, you'll only end up doing window shopping later. That is the hard reality of it. So you can't cast all your idealistic expectations on one system without asking, they too have a right to make money. So the question is, how are you exactly incentivizing it? Look at the recent statistics. My good friend Anand Ranganathan put out a brilliant statistic. 120 people for a million, 120 judges for a million people is a statistic in America, which is a country with 1/3 of your population, about 300 million. That's about, even today with all the illegal migration, is 450 million, that's 45 crores. We are 1.4 billion. 1 million population के लिए आपके पास कितने judges हैं, sir? और कितने लोग ये बनने के लिए तैयार हैं? So, and do you know, everybody I think is aware of this, that the constitutional ceiling for a government servant salary is the president's salary. The president's salary, all the emoluments put together, will not cross beyond 15 lakhs per month. Okay. Do you ask any lawyer who's doing decently well in a tier 1 city or even a tier 2 city, that figure will be made within a week. Within a week. Tell us, why would we go there? Realistic questions. If it's a question of money, why would anybody give up this and go and sit there? You please tell me. And Delhi High Court mein, har din, they have to deal with 80 to 100 cases per day. You try listening to 2 sets of people arguing for only half a day. And then you ask yourself, you have to listen to 160 people split into 80 pairs sitting from 10 to 4 or 10 to 4:30. And it goes sometimes, these days people are sitting until 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock. Judges are sitting even until 8 o'clock. That part people have to realize. There are instances where judges have sat until midnight, and not just because a terrorist is knocking the doors of the Supreme Court. So the point I'm trying to make is, there are some realistic problems which can be fixed, but it will require apportioning of funds and allocation of resources which are not constrained by other systemic issues. Because today if I say, judges ki salary ko badha do, baki log chup rahenge, babus chup rahenge, teachers chup rahenge, bureaucrats chup rahenge, then obviously this is going to translate to deeper pockets on the part of the state. So one of the fundamental things that most developed countries do, don't compare yourself with America, you'll never be in America. Compare yourself with Germany, Israel, Korea, smaller countries, or Japan for that matter, is what can we do to incentivize this? Or even Singapore for that matter. The judge of the Chief Justice of the Singapore Supreme Court makes much more money than the Chief Justice of India. Or even politicians for that matter. You'll have to have a serious conversation on this. It can't be just spit and scoot on the subject. And finally on NCRT, I don't disagree with you. There is a very popular saying which came from the Netherlands Chief Justice, not that I need to quote some foreigner, and especially because of the complexion of his skin. The point is, the higher you go, the more open you should be to criticism. Okay, that's the fundamental philosophy. And I think no institution should be an exception to that rule. And I don't support that statement. And if somebody makes a statement, you address the situation as opposed to saying you don't talk about it. Okay, that is equally a reality. I'll leave it at that.
Sanjeev is.
I will answer the question on Morijjabi. You see, I grew up in Kolkata. When Morijjabi massacre happened, I think it was 1979, right? I was 8 years old. So it happened within 100 kilometers of where I was growing up at that time. I happened to live in a government colony. Many of those who carried out that massacre or abetted to it and later suppressed the memory of that massacre actually lived in and around where I lived. So I actually personally knew those people. I still am in a WhatsApp group with their kids. And yet I had absolutely no idea that such a massacre had happened. Till I grew up, and it's only in my 20s or 30s I found out about it and I wrote about it as well. So it is incredible that something of that scale had happened and had been suppressed pretty much for so long that many, many years later I managed to discover it. As far as there were many other massacres, I am witness, by the way, of another one. There were the Ananda Margis who were killed on Dhakuria Bridge. I didn't actually see the incident itself, but I did see their bodies lying there because I used to go to the lake area to swim. Many of you may have also gone there, ILSS and various swimming clubs. So that happened when I was maybe 13 or 14. And I do remember going by bus and looking out, and their dead bodies were lying there. They lay there for at least a day or two. So I am in many ways grew up very, very close to that violence that you have just mentioned. And it is incredible that one of them I didn't know about, And the other one was barely spoken about for maybe a day or two in the press and then forgotten. And yet, this same group of people and their ideological descendants will make a big fuss about, some argument or somebody has refused to rent out something to somebody and make that as being such a big fuss. I'm not saying those other things are right, but I'm just telling you why, and this is something that Sai also said, that the control of intellectual spaces by those belonging to various shades of the left, you have to grant them the fact that they were able to do it for so long and continue to do it. I'll give you the example, for example, of Bhagat Singh. Okay? Bhagat Singh was undoubtedly a patriot. He gave his life. This is not really about Bhagat Singh himself. But it is quite incredible that while you celebrate Bhagat Singh, there were two other people who died on the same day for exactly the same reason, and most of you will not be able to name them. Why? The reason for it is a very simple one. Bhagat Singh, although he did not come from a movement that was left-wing, became, towards the end of his life, a Marxist. The Marxists had a serious problem, particularly after independence, because they had not really participated in the freedom struggle, and in fact, during the Second World War, had actively collaborated with the British. And their founder of the movement, M.N. Roy, had drifted off from the movement. So they had only one real hero, Bhagat Singh. So he was made into this great hero. To make him a great hero, you had to diminish the other two. Also, interestingly, Bhagat Singh is unique in not being considered a Punjabi hero. So you converted Netaji into a Bengali hero, Shivaji into a Maratha hero, and so on and so forth. And a very handful of leaders were allowed to be national leaders. Some of them happened to share the surname Gandhi. And the one exception to that was Bhagat Singh. That is it. Everybody else is a sectional leader. Ambedkar, Dalit leader. Aurobindo, not even a leader, he's a saint. Raj Bihari Bose, completely forgotten. Even the Raj Bihari Avenue that you have in Kolkata is not Raj Bihari Bose. It is Raj Bihari Ghosh, who nobody knows what his contributions are. So this management of our memory is what I have been trying to break. One of the attempts I've made here through the SHIP project is to break people out and begin to explore their history. And so this, taking this Morijhapi issue into and extending it to the wider issue of reclaiming our memory, I'll end by saying that there is even today a very popular book you'll find in bookshops, in the airport and so on, a book called Coromandel by a well-known English writer called Charles Allen. The book is Coromandel. It's about the coastal history. In its first page of that book, in the second paragraph, it basically, remember it's a coastal history of India. It states that the Hindus are a strange people. Other than one raid they made during Chola period to Southeast Asia, they showed no interest in the seas. What? I mean, just imagine. You have a book published, by the way, not in colonial times, but in 2017, by a well-known author who writes a history of coastal India and basically wipes out our entire maritime history in the second paragraph. That gives him the space basically to write our history of our coastline essentially as a colonial history, which is effectively what happened with the Morijhapi massacre. You wipe that entire memory out and then just carry on as if nothing happened. So what both of us are trying to do is to tell you that history. And much of that history, interestingly, at least the particular bits that Sai deals with, is recent history. Even my book, Revolutionary, is recent history. It's within living memory in some cases. You can Google this stuff up. So anyway, that hopefully answers your question. Thank you.
You know, this discussion, this very riveting discussion, has been all about the control of the intellectual space. And although we've disengaged from party politics, it's always been somewhere like the proverbial elephant in the room. And this is more so because 2026 happens to be an election year in West Bengal. It's not our custom in Kolkata to ever suggest who you should vote for. That is, as Sai very rightly pointed out, that is a matter of individual choice. But what we will do in this is to suggest that one, all of you should register yourselves. And all of you, without exception, should vote. Please go out and vote, because it's that apathy which actually makes it very, very difficult to create the environment whereby a wholesome political and intellectual discourse can be conducted. If politics is merely the end to the achievement or towards the realization of Dharma as an ideal state, I think we should never be in a situation where we get subverted by politics. Thank you very much for all of you for attending. I know there are hundreds of questions which you would like to ask, both of them. I think Sanjeev has already signed copies of his books on the table there. But Sai, there are various people who want to bring their books and get them to sign. He can sign it right on the podium and you all can come. As for the selfie mad rush, that's a free market. Thank you very much.